I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire. The largest city in New Hampshire, lauded by most, is just another suburb of Boston. But not to be mistaken. Like most New England cities and towns, it's enriched with its history as a mill town, where many of its current residents worked in its legendary textile mills at ages so young as 9. However, these days, Manchester is just as much a part of the rat race as cities such as Boston, Providence, and Hartford. Its rich history as an industrial giant is now turning to commerce. Hampshire and City Hall plazas are not the only high-rising objects that make up Manchester's skyline. Across the Merrimack River, past Manchester's west side, and into the hills north and west of the city, lies the small town of Goffstown, New Hampshire, which is home to North and South Mount Uncanunic, named by the Amoskeag Indian tribe meaning woman's breast. I wondered how many Manchester residents knew of the hills they looked at every single day. Do you know where Mount Uncanunic is?
I don't know, but as soon as I find out, you'll be the first I'll tell.
All right.
No.
Nope.
I've heard of it, but I'm not quite sure what it is. No.
Yep.
No idea.
If you could go out into the street and I told you to point at Mount Uncanunic, could you point it out?
No.
Do you know where Mount Uncanunic is?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You do? Finally, someone who knew. And could you point in the general direction for me?
Okay. Wait a minute, I gotta
Or not.
get my
There we go.
general direction now.
Meet Sarah Cretion, hiking partner extraordinaire. 48 bagged, 4. And then there's me, John Lacroix, peak bagger. 48 bagged, 18. And on a warm February day in New Hampshire, we ascended to the 1,320-foot peak my father took me to many years ago. And per the hiking norm, we ran into friendly strangers on Mount Uncanunic's North Peak.
Kind of a funny thing because I've lived here for like 10 years and I've always wanted to, I like to hike, but I've never hiked right here. And it takes him living here like a couple months to say, hey, I found the trail for North Mountain, let's go hike up there. Oh gosh, I've been hiking since I was 18 and just have always really enjoyed it. It's kind of a spiritual deal for me, but yeah, I probably did my first one when I was like 18 or 19. So I'll do any kind of hiking, any kind.
How many of the 48 do you have done?
I think I'm probably about 10 or so.
And do you plan to get them all done?
Oh, definitely.
And how is it spiritual to you? What about it makes it spiritual?
Just the ability to kind of center myself, pull away from the real world and kind of get to where my priorities are. I have faith, so I think, it gives me an opportunity to connect to my faith and, maybe talk to God or whatever. And, just get out of the rat race for a little while and just, think about what's important to me.
Yes. Hiking for spiritual reasons. Is it more exercise right now, would you say, for you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not in great shape, and I'm 47 years old, and I'm not a lifelong hiker, so it's...
And let's not forget about those out-of-shape hikers out for an afternoon stroll. But while Sarah and I are hiking the hills in southern New Hampshire for our winter warm-up, we're thinking about bigger fish to fry. This is my story, our story, and your story of hiking the 48. From raging rivers to horrific winds, Mother Nature affords us a glance at the power used in shaping our landscape. But deep within our most pure places, we receive our precious rewards. And of course, to receive our rewards, we must travel to find it.
Last shot. You're lucky.
In early spring of 1992, my father chaperoned my 6th grade field trip to tiny Packmonadnock in the southwest corner of New Hampshire. It was after that where my dad took me to Mount Uncanunic to see if my infatuation with hiking was true. And later that spring, we found ourselves on Cannon Mountain. It's a shame it took me 12 years to fully appreciate the reward he gave me then. He taught me of a club, a list, the AMC's 4,000 Footer Club, where one hikes a list of 48 peaks that rise above 4,000 feet. The reward? A patch and a scroll. 12 years after beginning my quest, I found myself once again at the base of Cannon Mountain, this time to engulf another soul into the glory of hiking these fabled hills. Except this year, I would set my goals higher than any year previously in an attempt to finish the remaining 30 mountains on my list. On May 2nd, 2004, we began our season hiking the 4,100-foot Cannon Mountain. I had hiked this peak 5 times previously, but Sarah still needed to check it off her list. As we pushed ourselves up the muddy, snowy trails of Cannon, we found ourselves basking in the mountainous joy these mountains exude upon us. The summit was windy this day as we ate our traditional summit peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Not long after, we caught ourselves dreaming of summits to come, and we also often thought of those who first brought us this list we were conquering and why they had.
I can tell you that it was started in the 50s. And one of the principal people that started it was a man by the name of Al Robertson. And the ideals were to engage people who like to hike in the mountains and to engage them to be a small club who would be interested in regular outings and trying to disperse people over a broader range of peaks than just hiking in the Presidential Range or on the Franconia Ridge. It was a very, very small group of people that were basically all friends who had this common interest of hiking together.
But its roots really go back to the early 1930s. In December of 1931, Nathaniel Goodrich,
who was one of the pioneer trail builders for the White Mountains back in the from 1950 to 1930. He wrote an article in Appalachia, the Journal of the AMC, proposing this list of 36 peaks, all of 4,000 feet in elevation, and all of which he had already climbed. This is actually a copy of the December 1931 issue of Appalachia, where Nathaniel Goodrich comes up with the idea of doing the 4,000 footers in winter. And this is the article starts here and actually goes over onto the next page, where he has the first listing of the 4,000 footers. Mr. Goodrich's list included 36 peaks, all 4,000 feet in elevation, and his rule for those was what they call the 300-foot rule, where there had to be at least a 300-foot rise from the call of any connecting ridgeline up to the summit. Therefore, some of the peaks that are on the list today were not included on that original list. Over time, as more and more people got interested in climbing the mountains here, the rules and the number of peaks, of course, have changed as we've gone along. Mr. Goodrich, after his original list of 36 peaks, he expanded it to 51 peaks. As the Appalachian Mountain Club formally established the 4,000 footer club back in 1957, it was established then after what they call the map party at home of one of the proponents of this group, where they established a 200-foot rule in the call up to the peak, and that added about 10 peaks to the list. So now you had 46 peaks. So the original 4,000 footer list was 46 peaks. Since then, around 1980, 2 additional peaks were added.
So now let's say you followed the rules and completed the list of 48 peaks. How does one go about registering with the 4,000 footer committee?
In the early days when I applied, there was a form you had to fill out, and you had to make note of all of your dates, and they would write you back and then say, we want you to write an essay on one of the peaks, and they would tell you which one they wanted you to write it on. You would then submit that, and then they would accept your application. It's all on the honor system. There was no way to validate whether anybody really climbed the peaks or not. But I suspect in the early days, they had some sense that if you wrote that essay, they could tell from that whether or not you really had climbed that peak or not.
I think in the first year that the 4,000 footer list as we know it today was compiled, the first year there were 17 people climbed the list that year. The number gradually grew. I think it was up to about 199 by 1964. Now pretty much from the mid-1980s on, or maybe even 1990s, about 200, 250 people a year, anywhere from 200 to 250, finish it every year. I believe the total as of this year was around 7,600 people that finished it, what's called the all-season 4,000 footer list. When you get into the winter list, the people who climbed in the winter, of course the number is drastically different. Far fewer people climb them in the wintertime. I'm sure there are hundreds, if not maybe even 1,000, who knows how many people have finished the list and have never bothered to apply for an application. I know some people, hikers, for whatever reasons they have, they will climb 47 peaks and they'll save the one that they won't climb. Usually Owl's Head is the one I always hear. People say for some reason they just don't want to finish the list, so they'll leave Owl's Head off the list and they won't do it. So they'll never apply, even though basically they've done them all. And why people are like that, I'm not sure.
So let's hear a little more about that reward you get for completing the list.
We get a scroll. In fact, the scroll that they use for people who have finished the list was actually the original scroll. The design is the same as it was back in 1958 when they had the first 4,000 footer club meeting, annual meeting, where they actually gave out awards. And you also get a small patch which denotes that you finished the list. And it kind of goes on from there.
This is my dad. He is a mountain of a man, having run the Boston Marathon, and of course, having completed the 48. It had been 5 years since we had hiked together, and on Father's Day we took a trip to Mount Moosilauke, where I had my first chance to listen to him speak about his feelings on hiking. How many of the 48 have you done?
48. Few times.
When did you start?
First time I hiked the mountain was in I was 39 years old. I'm 55 next month, so quite a while ago. When I first started, I did Mount Washington, my first hike, and said I would never hike another mountain in my life. It was the hardest thing I ever did. Then I took another hike and got to the top of another mountain without all the people and looked at the view and said, wow, somebody sure in hell made this. Wasn't a human being, that's for sure. That's when you really know there's a God, when you look out and see the beauty he's made. And that's when I said I gotta do them all. I gotta hike all of them. I gotta visit everyone.
So it's a spiritual journey for you?
Absolutely. And I wanted to take the people I love with me on this journey. I had to share it with somebody. You just can't keep it to yourself. That's why I started hiking with my kids. Reach up and touch a cloud. Right over your head, one's coming.
On this day, I think I finally began to understand why my dad introduced me to this great journey. But one question still remains. Who else hikes these mountains?
My name is Tom McCarty. I live in Norwood, Massachusetts.
I'm Jean Kitchen, and I'm from Holden. And this is Jim, my husband.
And you're from Holden, Mass?
Mass, yes.
Chris Call from Auburn, New Hampshire.
My name is Peter Crane, and I'm from Kearsarge, New Hampshire.
Pete Garney from Camden, Maine.
Beth Caswell. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts.
Dave Cuvalier, and I'm from Auburn, New Hampshire.
It's Rhoda Bunnell, and I'm from Cornish Flat.
Mary Kissel, Books, New Hampshire.
From men and women, sometimes hiking alone, to large groups of friends. From husbands and wives to parents and their children. They come from all over with one common goal. But the question most often asked is why?
I think most people sort of follow this path. They go on a hike to be in the outdoors. And they may climb a 4,000 footer, they may not. If they like it, they'll come back and they'll do maybe a couple of different peaks. And sooner or later, they're going to buy a guidebook and they're going to pick up this book and they're going to look and say, oh, well, there's this list that's out there. And what differentiates, in my mind, people who say, oh, this is cool, I'm going to climb the list, versus those that don't, are whether you're an inherent collector or not.
When you start climbing these 4,000 footers, it does become almost an obsession with you. It can become real obsessive. People, that's all they focus on. It's a great way to get outdoors, a great way to explore other areas of the White Mountains. And that's one of the reasons why the 4,000 footer list was compiled at the beginning.
It's the physical wellness that I feel from doing it. There's a mental thing too. And then there's just the cause. There's 48 of them, and why not?
It's exercise.
We also hike out west, so it helps us
train for
what you could call it training. But
it started because we did the Teton Crest Trail, and I figured I was 50 and I did the Teton Crest Trail, and I didn't think I could hike anymore, and I really liked it, so that's when we started doing the 48.
Just a goal to set. You know, I was into hiking. I've been into hiking for a long time, but it was just something to accomplish.
Just to give us some focus, because there's so many mountains around here. It gives you a destination. Probably 50% spiritual and 50% so I can go have a few beers afterwards on the way home.
Because of my friend Rick. He had a goal, and we decided to tag along. It started out more exercise, but it's become a little more spiritual.
Just started doing a lot of hiking and did a couple of them and just kind of got onto a roll. And that was it. It's exercise for sure, but it's a real spiritual experience for me as well.
I guess I just was up for a challenge and thought maybe I'd take a nice day walk. I think we're surrounded. Oh my God, it's coming towards me. Can you get it away from me?
No, he's getting home.
Oh.
As spring turned to summer, we continued our many journeys to the tops of numerous peaks. All along the way, we've thought of those before us and what their adventures meant to them. But as the number of peaks I had remaining got smaller and smaller, I began wondering what it would be like to finish the list. And then, we ran into a fellow hiker on the summit of isolation as he finally finished his list after 17 years.
Jeff Novotny, and I'm from Hopkinton, New Hampshire. This is it, number 48. The first one was 87. The first one was actually Washington in 87. So 17 years. So it was kind of exercise, but it was more just growing up in New Hampshire and really kind of wanting to experience what the state has to offer. I guess in a sense it's spiritual and then it's peaceful, and you have, if you want to do it by yourself, a lot of time to think about things, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad, but it's definitely as enjoyable for me doing them with people or doing them alone. Well, that's my brother there, and he's done about 10 of them now, so.
Speaking with Jeff was a surreal experience. His day marked the first time I had ever witnessed someone complete the 48. Watching him was like watching a child in a store filled with his favorite candy, and best of all, he could see the first of his 48 from his last. It was here where I finally got a glance at the sense of accomplishment one feels upon completing the list, and I was brought to tears on many occasions from this day forward as I began to envision my own final hike.
There's mixed feelings when you complete a list. There's a feeling of euphoria because you just accomplished something that few people have. And you've worked very hard over a long period of time. But there's also a feeling of melancholy in that your journey is over. It's not just about climbing the peaks, it's about the journey, it's about all the experiences along the way, the friends you've met, the different kinds of scenarios that you've run into in the different areas of the mountains. When you finish a list, that's over in a way. That part of the journey is over.
Every 4th of July, it is a yearly tradition of mine to summit Mount Washington with an American flag in tow. This year, we took to the summit by way of the Crawford Path, America's oldest maintained trail. While on the summit, I got to see the mountain I chose to be my 48th, Mount Madison in the Northern Presidentials. And I quickly realized that it wasn't going to be long before this adventure was over.
There was a small group of people who started the club and got the lists established, and then there was a second small group of people who took the club to the next level, and I consider myself in that second group, where we promote the values of climbing the 4,000 footers in New Hampshire and the New England 4,000 footers, but we also created this opportunity that many, many people now have followed along in terms of more orienteering in the bushwhacking. And now there's a third group really out there who are pushing the limits of climbing all of the 3,000 footers in the winter, or climbing all the 3,000 footers in New York and New Hampshire. But I think the evolution of it has really gone sort of in 3 phases. I would say in the 3rd phase too is also some of the speed records that we're now seeing in individuals who are climbing all the 4,000 footers in New Hampshire in a matter of days.
Did he just say that people try to hike the 48 in a matter of days?
Perhaps people have read about or heard about all these speed hiking records that have been set in the last couple of years. You had Ted Cave Dog Keyser, who in 2002 set the record of the fastest 4,000 footer traverse. He did it in something like 3 days, 17 hours and 51 minutes or something like that. And his record lasted for less than a year, because Tim Seaver from Vermont, of course, went on the next year and beat him by about an hour and a half. So people are always trying to up the ante.
This is Ted Cave Dog Keyser. He was the first man to ever hike, or rather run, the 48 in ultra-marathon style. He completed the 48 in a record 3 days, 17 hours, and 21 minutes on August 12, 2002. But how does it work? It's easy. Summit all 48 peaks the fastest. The clock starts at the trailhead of your first peak and stops on the summit of your last. But Cave Dog wasn't the first to set a formal speed record on the 48. In 1973, then 16 and 17-year-olds George and Tom Fitch, brothers from Concord, Massachusetts, set the first record of 6 days, 15 hours, and 30 minutes with the support of only their parents' station wagon and an old rickety bike. I had the privilege of meeting with George Fitch and speaking with him about his amazing feat.
Back in the early 70s, my brother and I saw this article about these guys that tried to do the Adirondack 46 peaks, and one of them died of a heart attack. So being high school kids, we said, hey, that sounds like a neat thing to try. Let's do it in the White Mountains. So we did them in 7 days. We had each already done the list. I did them when I was 13 for the first time. And my brother Tom probably did them a couple years later, also at 13. And then we just thought, well, we did them sort of the normal way, why don't we crank it up a bit and just do them in 7. There was a tremendous sense of accomplishment. You know, our parents and brothers and sisters, they thought it was really great, and a few of our friends heard about it and they thought it was cool, but it pretty much went unnoticed for like a 29-year span from 1973 until 2002, when Teddy Kaiser broke the record, and that suddenly renewed a lot of interest in the whole thing. Hours and minutes really didn't matter, because we were just going to do it in 7 days. But my brother insisted that we stop and play pinball one evening when we finished on sort of early. So we played pinball, we went swimming. Another kind of funny thing that came to mind was, while I was off bicycling to retrieve the car, my brother was waiting at the trailhead, and a friendly group came along and they unloaded all this chocolate on him that they no longer needed. So I get back after pedaling around, and probably a couple hours later I come back with the car to fetch him, and he says, this group of hikers just gave me a whole bunch of chocolate. And I said, oh great, where's my half? And he said, well, you weren't here, so I ate it. It's something that's physically challenging. While you're doing that, you're not playing video games, you're not getting into other mischief, you're out there. I think getting outside is so important, and it's healthy.
Later that afternoon, I drove to Vermont to meet with photographer Tim Seaver, the current White Mountain speed record holder, to discuss his adventure and thoughts.
Well, part of it was regional pride. I mean, I thought it was kind of surprising that this guy is from the West Coast is coming out here and, you know, cleaning up all these records, when I knew for a fact from my hikes in the White Mountains that a lot of the people that worked at the huts were, you know, very fast hikers. I remember looking at Lake of the Clouds at this chart that they would have of the times that the hutmen would hike up, you know, with these heavy pack boards with like 75 pounds of stuff on it. So I just found it surprising that no one from the Northeast was really stepping up to the plate on this yet. So I felt that this kind of record should belong to someone that regularly visits these mountains, that has like a long-term relationship with them. Basically what I do is just simulate the routes that Cave Dog took and then see what my time was. And then while I was practicing, and I would also put the water bottles in place that I was going to use on the actual adventure itself. So most of it was just replicating what he did, and then comparing my times, and then if needed to to practice the route again, if I needed to bring my time down. I mean, as far as the actual time, it's trivial to me. I mean, I beat him. That's by an hour and a half. That's basically what I remember. It was 3 days, 15 hours, and some change. But as far as remember the exact time, that's not important to me. So I did it for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons was as a high-speed photographic scouting mission. A common way for me to approach photography in the White Mountains is to, instead of carrying around a huge pack of camera gear and a tripod to areas that I am not familiar with, in the chances of finding a beautiful view, I'd prefer to just run the mountain or the route first with no gear and just take notes about, like, oh, there's a nice view at this point, or that kind of thing. So in some ways it was just a scouting run.
And what does one need for this incredible journey?
Basically a really good pair of trail running shoes. Well, actually 5 or 6 pairs, because they're going to get wet on you and you're going to want to change them. A lot of socks, a lot of shoes, little tiny pack, and a really good plan as far as your support. But yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about it, is it really doesn't require much equipment at all. Mostly it's just about you and the mountains. The worst one I got was hooking my toe on a tree root on, I think it was Mount Wambeck, which stretched my hallucis longus tendon, which was very painful. This is like on the second day in the afternoon when the injury happened, and basically I was kind of limping through the rest of the trip, which there was still like 80 or 90 miles to go. So it was difficult. Then it slowed me down pretty majorly. But other than that, just sore feet.
Even though these records are amazing, there remains great controversy in the hiking community. These records are only officially recognized by the men who have done them. Some hikers feel these machine-like men are ruining the spirit of hiking. I asked some of them how they felt about this issue.
Well, there's multiple controversies brewing over this. I mean, one of the ones that came up was some of the people in the AMC thought that because we're using the AMC list of 4,000 footers, that they could apply the rules of the 4,000 footer club to Cave Dog's challenge. The main one being that you're not complete with the mountain until you come back to the road, which a lot of people gave me grief for my attempt, because I finished on Owl's Head, which just happens to be one of the peaks that's furthest from the road. Because I didn't officially do them according to the rules of the 4,000 footer club, that's applying standards that, I mean, it was Cave Dog's challenge. He set the rules for it.
I think some people just don't understand it, or maybe they think that the mountains are supposed to be just enjoyed in a slow, peaceful way, and that they're really not a sort of a stage for competition. But I think that it's unfortunate they think that, because the people like Teddy Kaiser and Tim Seaver, that they fly through the mountains so quick that, as one person put it on this AMC bulletin board, they come and go before you even know they're out there, and they travel really light, so they're not going to cause any impact. They're not picking up a tent platform, they're not staying on the summit too long, getting in people's way. They just fly through the mountains, and that's it.
I could see where it would bother the hiking community at large if there were just hordes of people running around on the trails saying, get out of my way, I'm Johnny Speed Hiker, coming through, kind of thing. But I can't see that happening. There's so few people that want to do this kind of thing. It's not really something. That's why I don't understand why people get so worked up about this, about speed hiking being something that they have to look down upon.
And some people think, well, you're going to miss the scenery and things like that, but these mountains are really large, and even if you're hiking rapidly, they don't go by in a blur. You still fully enjoy the scenery. You just see more of it in a day than someone who's going a little bit slower.
I personally believe that whatever an individual does in which they feel a sense of accomplishment in the mountains, that's what they should do. And if it's climbing the peaks once in 3 days and they get personal satisfaction from that, then that's great. They got that satisfaction, and I think that's terrific. If it's spending a lifetime in the mountains, you should do that.
I guess probably the most remarkable peak bagging record of all is the one set by Guy Waterman, the late Guy Waterman, who was the only person to ever climb all the 4,000 footers from all 4 points of the compass in winter, most of them solo. That is a phenomenal record when you figure that half, maybe even more, of these are bushwhack hikes, and to do it by yourself. And some of the terrain he must have gone in. I just can't imagine the stuff he had to break through to get to these summits, and to do it by yourself under conditions, I'm sure every imaginable condition, is just an incredible feat. And it's something that Guy had always downplayed anything he'd written. But those of us who knew Guy and knew what he accomplished are still astounded that anyone could do what he did.
What makes man man is his potential ability to conquer both himself and his environment. We are each inevitably and terribly and forever personally responsible for everything we do. This is a tough philosophy, but it is the only one, as proved through the ages, by which man can turn his personal hopes into reality through individual incentive and deserved rewards he can win and keep. Guy Waterman. No matter what set of rules are followed, these men accomplished amazing feats of physical endurance, and they deserve to be recognized. But for whatever reason they do it, they have set the course for a new challenge to the list of 48 peaks. From everyday people who hike for the sheer enjoyment of these great hills, to the men who dart through the forest in pursuit of a record, these aren't the only people who hike the 48.
My name is Jeb Bradley, and I live in Wolfboro, and I'm a member of Congress. Well, I climbed Mount Washington when I was 10 or 11 as a youngster in a camp. I've done it again subsequent to that, so it really took me 40 plus years. Well, I've always loved to hike, and I've loved the White Mountains, and maybe 3 or 4 years ago I took out the Appalachian Mountain Club guidebook and decided it was time to make check marks next to the ones that I had climbed, and I was actually surprised that I had only done maybe 10 or 15. And I thought that, boy, I was surprised I hadn't done more of them. One of the things that I tell people in New Hampshire is that the White Mountains are some of the most rigorous hiking in the world. They're not particularly dangerous in the sense of having to have a lot of mountaineering experience to climb them. It's really just hiking and being in decent physical shape. And when you get up on the top of all of these peaks and you see them all, and you see them from different angles, it's really pretty exciting. And there's just some very interesting terrain that the White Mountains goes through too. I know that former Governor Meldrum Thompson has hiked all 48, as has Chief Justice Souter. So there are a number of people from New Hampshire who've done it, and it's a great experience, and I recommend it to anybody that, wants to do it.
Congressmen, former governors, and even Supreme Court justices. And then there is Sarah, one of my big inspirational forces. Her story is, like most, unique, but in the sense that she is a type 1 diabetic. I asked her to talk to me about what this journey was even to her.
Hiking the 48 because it's a nice way to get away from the hustle and bustle of the real world, to just get away from it all and get out in nature and put yourself to the test, and then when you get to the top, it's beautiful. My boyfriend, John, started hiking a long time ago, and he decided that one day on the 4th of July that we should hike Mount Washington. So I thought, sure, why not? So we went ahead and we hiked it, and it was probably the hardest hike I've ever done, but we made it. Well, I'm diabetic, and it can be very difficult to keep my blood sugar from going too high or too low. And sometimes you can't tell the difference between being low and just being dehydrated. So that's a big challenge. Remembering to test my blood sugar, monitor my insulin intake, monitor my fluid intake, and eating, just remembering to eat and remembering to breathe. It's not so much a goal, but I just want to finish it to say that I've done it, and also just to see the 48 4,000 footers. It's one big story, and it's just so much fun.
Sarah was right. The whole thing is just one big story. And as people complete the list by the hundreds every year, the big story gets even bigger, and the individual stories just as intriguing. But what happens after this list when a hiker must choose to move on?
They can do, okay, now what do? I finished, where do I go from here? Well, as a natural offshoot of this, of course, back when they were first compiling these lists of peaks, somebody, of course, had the foresight to count up all the 4,000 footers in the New England states, meaning the ones in Vermont and also Maine. So there was 5 in Vermont and what, maybe a dozen or 13 in Maine. So that's probably the natural progression for peak baggers, is to go onto the list like the New England 4,000 footers. And from there, well, there's all kinds of lists. Of course, you have both summer and winter lists. There's a New England 100 highest list, which is a list of the highest 100 peaks in all of New England. The list, it seems, go on and on. There's a New Hampshire 100 highest list, and people doing lists, the 3,000 footers of New England, or the 3,000 footers of the Northeast, which includes New York and Pennsylvania. People strive to do these, and people, they do get compulsive about this stuff. But people are always out there trying to do them.
I don't know if it's that people are kind of competitive by nature, or like challenges, or like to attack lists, and or just like to accomplish something. It might be that they start out hiking and enjoy it and then figure, well, as long as I'm doing this, I might as well do all of the ones on a list.
There's something about these mountains that touch people in unimaginable ways. The forces Mother Nature draws to us can make even the greatest man or woman feel as one of the weak. The mountains test your soul, they test your fortitude, and they test your body. But most of all, these mountains exemplify life. Like hunting in its more noble forms and farming at its most contemplative, climbing urges on its adherents a kind of communion with the natural world. It is a way of seeing and feeling and weaving oneself into nature. But it is more intense than most disciplines because peril is part of its equation. To climb is to enter a labyrinth where the menace that awaits is nature's indifference to its own creation. An indifference you feel in those corrosive instincts of self-estrangement that offset even the greatest alpinists. Brink of oblivion moments where the proximity of the void draws a crushing tension with the nature within and the nature without. What the hell am I doing here? But in the payoff of its transcendent moments, in its therapeutic rapture, climbing can generate states of mind akin to the mystic's experience of unity, dissolving the distinctions of self and not self, so that the outer reality of wind and sky truly seems like part of the terrain of one's inner life. Our lives are books, filled with chapters telling the tales of all of our great and lackluster adventures. We are fortunate enough to be the authors of our books, whereas we write the pages turn depicting each adventure as it unfolds. All of our adventures are similar, yet so far apart. But it's how we learn from our pages that sets us apart as individuals. To some, this adventure in hiking the 48 becomes our greatest adventure, our epic. In the end of my epic, I learned many lessons on why people hike the 48. You see, I always thought it was one of 2 reasons, exercise or spiritual. But in the end, I learned that to some, and even to myself, it was more. It was about seeking solitude, becoming one with Mother Nature. It was about making new friendships. It was about the risks involved. It was about proving something to oneself and to others. It was about rekindling relationships or making existing ones stronger. It was about discovering one's inner being, and it was about whatever the heck you wanted it to be about. As for me personally, I learned that these mountains and its people were meant to be shared. I was lucky to be able to share these mountains with my best friend Sarah, with whom every weekend I got to fall in love with over and over again. Together as a team, we taught each other lessons from within our books we would have otherwise never shared. We shared in moments of greatness, and we shared fears in moments of peril where we had feared for our lives. But best of all, together we shared nature's beauty with each other and members of our respective families. We became founders of a team, Team Sherpa. I learned the irony involved with life in relation to the trails. As I looked back on each trail, I remembered it had a beginning and an end. And along these paths, I came to junctions where I had to choose a road to go down. But seemingly in the end, I ended up in the same place, the beginning, only with a new set of lessons. It was these lessons that helped me fight many inner demons in becoming something I had always dreamed of becoming, internally happy. I also learned that people whom I had met as strangers were never really strangers at all. They were just as much an extension of this journey as the trees, the clouds, and the rivers. Every summit was different. Every summit, a new sanctuary for me to reflect. Every summit, a place for me to dream. Every summit, a place to see another summit, and a moment in time from a different angle.
She's crying, laughing. I think. She said yes.
But the biggest lesson of all is that in the beginning, and 12 years later in the end, my dad brought me hiking not just to share his experience with me, but just because he wanted to be one thing: my dad. No matter when your journey begins, or when your journey ends, for whatever reasons are yours, these reasons were mine for hiking the 48. I'm sitting 3,907 feet above sea level on the summit of Mount Star King in Jefferson, New Hampshire. We're on our way to hiking Mount Womback. Cut.
Hello. Cookie?
I'm not going to videotape him doing it.
And I wonder how the day was going for those before him.
Actually, I'm looking forward to bagging Clinton's Peak. I've heard a lot about it.
I have to pee.